Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be exploring something that I think is really fascinating, but a lot of people don't talk about that much. Sexual fantasies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting topic. It's obviously one that gets people kind of, nervous to talk about, but yeah, there's a lot of curiosity there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And to help us understand it a little better, we're looking at an article from goodtherapy.org. It's called Do Men and Women Have Different Sexual Fantasies?
Mm.
It was published back in 2012. And it's just really interesting. It has some research in it, and then it also has some comments from people that read the article.
Okay, I'm ready. This is going to be good.
All right. So I think maybe a good place to start would be, when you see, like when you read books or you watch movies and there's some kind of fantasy, often it involves a stranger.
Right, yeah, it's kind of
Well,
like the trope, right? It's the mysterious stranger, the allure of the unknown, something like that.
exactly, yeah. But a study was done at the University of Granada, and they had over 2,500 people participate, so a pretty large sample size. And, these people were 18 to 73 years old. And what they found was that men and women overwhelmingly fantasize about their partners.
Oh, really? So it's not this, oh, everybody just wants somebody they don't know.
Yeah, it seems like it's more about, somebody that they have a connection with.
Okay, interesting. So it really challenges what we typically see, doesn't it? It suggests our fantasies might be way more grounded in reality than we think.
Right. And I think that was one of the big takeaways, that for both men and women, it was very similar in that regard. But, okay, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because almost 80% of the people who participated in the study said they had at least one negative sexual fantasy.
Negative sexual fantasy. So now, okay, so what exactly does that mean?
I think it's a good question, and it's something that I don't think they necessarily defined it very well. But for women, it seems like it was often something involving a forced sexual encounter. And for men, the recurring theme was homosexuality.
Hmm. I wonder if it's not really about being negative or positive, but about reflecting maybe anxieties we have. Like if men are fantasizing about homosexuality, maybe it's because there are all these social expectations around being straight. You know what I mean? So maybe it's not good or bad. It's just what we're worried about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It could be tapping into some kind of societal norm that is making people a little bit anxious. And so then they are having those kinds of fantasies. So yeah, it's really interesting. So even though there was all this common ground between men and women, there were some differences too.
Yeah, I mean, it is the age-old question, right? Are men and women really that different, even in our fantasies?
Right, exactly. Well, men, they tended to fantasize more often, just in general. And then women, they had more positive fantasies, kind of going back to that idea of positive and negative. And then men had more, I guess you could call them experimental fantasies.
Experimental. What does that mean? Experimental. I'm intrigued.
Well, it's like, threesomes, or, maybe more than three people, you know, just like, things that are different.
Okay, so pushing the boundaries a little bit, trying new things, even if it's just in their minds, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But this is really interesting to me. The researchers, they said that they think it could actually be beneficial to fantasize about sex.
Oh, okay. That makes sense though, right? If you think about it, it's like a safe space in your head where you can, play out scenarios, try things out, kind of a mental playground for our desires.
Right. Yeah. It's like it doesn't have any consequences.
Exactly. And maybe even, work through anxieties you have about sex, kind of like a private rehearsal.
Yeah. And I think, they were saying it could even like help with your desire. Like, if you're having a fantasy about something, it could actually boost your arousal.
Absolutely, yeah. It can kind of prime you, get you in the mood. And, there's even some therapeutic applications for this too, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Like if someone's struggling with, sexual problems or maybe has some anxieties, guided fantasies can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the research, but now I really want to look at what people had to say, because there were a lot of comments on this article.
Yeah, let's see what real people are thinking about all of this.
So there was one commenter, Julia, and she said that she was really glad to read that, most people fantasize about their partners. She thought it was really cool that, it was something that most couples share.
That's sweet. It's like a secret connection, It's like it's nice to know you're not alone in that.
Right, yeah. But she also said it's really important to remember that everybody's an individual.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Just because you want each other doesn't mean you have the exact same fantasies.
Exactly. And then there was another comment from Marcy J., and she brought up a really good point about communication. She said, it's so important to talk to your partner about this stuff, especially because it's such a personal thing.
Right. It takes a lot of courage to be open about your fantasies, doesn't it? And it can be risky.
Yeah. You have to feel safe. Like you're not going to be judged.
For sure. Because if you can't talk about it, you end up feeling disconnected, and then who knows what happens.
Right, right. And then there was Rochelle. And she asked a really interesting question. Does sharing your fantasies actually make you more intimate?
Ooh, that's a great question. It makes you think, huh? Like, on the one hand, it could bring you closer, but on the other hand, maybe it's too much information, right?
Right, exactly. It really depends on the couple. And then, this is kind of funny. Philip said that he doesn't even think women have fantasies.
Oh, Philip, come on, man, catch up.
But thankfully, Marlo, she wrote back to him and she said, well, maybe they just don't have any fantasies about you.
Oh, burn. I love Marlo. She's got jokes.
Yeah. So you can see, there's all these different perspectives. But I think one that we should really talk about is this one from Celeste. She said that she's feeling really insecure because her husband always fantasizes about this other woman.
Yeah, that's a tougher one. It shows that fantasies can be a lot more complex than we think, right? It's not always just fun and games.
Right. It can bring up real feelings of jealousy and insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's just a fantasy.
Definitely. And that's something we should probably explore more after the break. It's a reminder that while fantasies can be fun, they can also tap into these real deep emotions that need to be handled carefully.
Absolutely. So why don't we take a break? We'll be right back. And in the meantime, think about, what are your biggest takeaways from what we've talked about so far? What questions do you have? Hold on to those thoughts, and we'll be back to dig a little deeper into the world of sexual fantasies. That comment from Celeste about her husband's fantasies about another woman, it's really interesting, right? Because like we were saying, fantasies, they can be kind of a safe space to explore things that you might not actually do.
Right. And most of the time, I think that's fine. It's healthy, even, just to have those thoughts and not necessarily act on them. But when it starts to affect your relationship, like when you start feeling insecure, like Celeste, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah. And then it's like, how do you even begin to talk about that with your partner?
It's tough, right? It can be a really, really sensitive topic, and it's so easy to feel judged or, misunderstood.
So what would you even say? Like, how do you have that conversation in a way that doesn't like blow up in your face?
Well, the first thing is to create a safe space, right? You both have to feel like you can be totally honest with each other without, freaking out or getting defensive. And remember, fantasies are often symbolic. So, don't just focus on the surface level of what the fantasy is, but try to understand what it might mean.
So, like, what is it really about? What's the underlying, need or desire?
Exactly. And even if you don't agree with the fantasy or understand it, you can still validate your partner's feelings and let them know that you hear them.
Because those feelings are real, right? Even if the fantasy is just, in their head.
Right. And of course, you have to set boundaries, too. If there's a certain fantasy that just makes you totally uncomfortable, you have every right to say that and to ask your partner to respect your feelings.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, if you're really struggling with this as a couple, sometimes it's helpful to talk to a therapist.
Absolutely. A therapist can be a great mediator, someone who can help you both communicate more effectively and work through those difficult emotions.
It's like having a relationship coach in your corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, all this talk about Celeste and her situation, it really makes me think about how important self-awareness is when it comes to fantasies.
Oh, totally. Right. It's not enough to just know what your fantasies are. You also have to understand why you have them, what they might be telling you about yourself.
Because sometimes fantasies can be like these little clues about things that we're not even conscious of, like maybe there's a unmet need or a hidden desire or even some fear that's lurking beneath the surface.
Right. They can be like a window into our subconscious. And the more we understand ourselves, the better we can communicate our needs to our partners.
Which ultimately leads to a stronger, more fulfilling relationship. And, we touched on this earlier, but I do want to go back to the idea of how fantasies can actually make sex better.
Oh, yeah. You mean how they can boost arousal and desire?
Exactly, because fantasies can add this whole new layer of excitement. You can break out of your routine, try new things in your mind, and just really spice things up.
And for some people, fantasies can be a way to deal with things that are making them anxious about sex.
Like, for example, someone who's self-conscious about their body. they could use fantasy to create a scenario where they feel confident and sexy.
Or if someone's experienced trauma, they could use fantasy to take back control and feel empowered.
Right. It's like using your imagination to heal and to explore different parts of yourself.
Yeah.
This whole conversation has been really eye-opening, but I have to admit, I'm still kind of struggling with this idea of negative fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
It feels so judgmental.
Yeah, I hear you. It's like, who are we to say what's good or bad when it comes to someone else's fantasies, right? What might seem negative to one person could be totally exciting to someone else.
Exactly. So maybe instead of thinking in terms of good and bad, we should think about it more like a spectrum.
Yeah.
Like some fantasies are more playful and lighthearted, while others might be darker or more intense.
I like that, a spectrum of exploration, and it's perfectly normal to have fantasies that fall anywhere along that spectrum.
The important thing is to be curious and self-aware, and to explore what your fantasies might be telling you about yourself and what you want.
Absolutely. This has been a really great discussion so far, and I'm sure our listeners are finding it just as insightful as we are.
So before we wrap things up, we wanted to take a moment to check in with you, our listener. What are your thoughts on all of this? What's resonating with you the most? Do you have any burning questions about fantasies that you'd like to explore further? Take a moment to reflect, and then we'll come back and share some final thoughts on this fascinating topic of sexual fantasies. So we're back, and I don't know about you, but I feel like we've only just begun to really understand this whole world of sexual fantasies.
Yeah, it's been quite a deep dive, hasn't it? We've talked about so many different aspects, from those common myths to how to communicate about fantasies, and even how they can help us grow.
And before the break, we asked you, our listener, to think about your own experiences with fantasies. What's resonating with you? What questions are still swirling around in your head? We hope this conversation has given you a new perspective on this often taboo topic.
Absolutely. That's what we always hope for with the deep dive, to get people thinking, questioning, and connecting the dots in ways they might not have before. Not just about the world out there, but the world inside each of us.
So as we wrap up this episode, maybe we could try to pull out a few key takeaways for our listeners. What do you think are the most important things to remember about sexual fantasies?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that they're normal, like completely normal and healthy. Having fantasies doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just part of being human.
Yeah, we need to let go of all that shame and judgment around fantasies.
Yeah.
Embrace the fact that people have all sorts of desires.
Right. And we've seen how fantasies can be a source of pleasure, a way to explore different parts of ourselves, and even help us grow as individuals. They can bring us closer to our partners and make our sex lives more exciting.
But as with anything, it's all about balance and being aware. Like we heard from Celeste, sometimes fantasies can create problems in relationships, especially if they make us feel insecure or lead to misunderstandings.
So communication is key. It's so important to talk to your partner to create a safe space where you can both be honest about your fantasies and what they mean to you, without judgment.
And if you're finding it tough to have those conversations on your own, don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist.
A therapist can really help guide you through those tricky conversations and come up with strategies for dealing with any challenges that come up.
So, to get back to the question we started with, do men and women really have different sexual fantasies?
While there might be some subtle differences in how often people fantasize or the specific content of their fantasies, I think the biggest takeaway is that there's a lot of overlap. Men and women both fantasize, and often those fantasies are about their partners.
And whether those fantasies are silly or serious, exciting or a little bit taboo, they all tell us something about what we desire, what we fear, and what it means to be human.
It's all part of the amazing complexity of human experience.
Well said. And on that note, we'd like to leave you with one final thought. How can we use our understanding of fantasies to build stronger, healthier, and more fulfilling relationships? It's a question worth pondering, maybe even discussing with your partner, a friend, or a therapist.
Because the more we know about our own desires and the desires of the people we love, the more we can create intimacy, connection, and a deeper appreciation for the beauty of human sexuality.
That's all for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep embracing the fascinating world around you and the world within you.